Back to today's video. Today is Thursday, September 4th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the state of New Hampshire and Republicans as they scramble across the state and look to a potential victory in the 2026 midterms as it becomes increasingly less and less likely that Republicans pull ahead in the 2026 midterm cycle. New Hampshire has been a focus of Republicans for a very long time. As long as we can remember, New Hampshire has been a battleground state, and as much as it has voted with the Democratic Party recently, they do have some tendencies to vote for Republicans in congressional elections, whether that be a House race, a Senate race, who currently has a Republican governor in the state. New Hampshire, by most standards, is a state that in a traditional year might be within reach for the Republican Party. But recent data seems to have suggested that Chris Pappas, the U.S. representative from one of the New Hampshire districts here, who is the likely Democratic nominee, is set to have a pretty solid and locked-in victory across the state. The most recent St. Anselm College poll shows that Chris Pappas is leading by 11 points against the presumptive Republican nominee for Senate, Scott Brown. Now, if that name rings a bell, it also might tell you a bit why Republicans are scared about their current state in the race. We can actually fast forward to this cycle. Scott Brown might ring a bell because he ran for Senate back in 2014 for this exact Senate seat. Now, that's not the only reason he might be a name that you remember in Republican politics. It's also because Scott Brown was a senator before, but not from the state of New Hampshire. Scott Brown won his race in 2010 in the neighboring state of Massachusetts, where he served and replaced Ted Kennedy in a very solid blue state, then went on to lose to Elizabeth Warren by about 6 points in the Senate election in a year that Obama won the state by a massive, massive amount. 2 years later, he pivoted. He shifted over to New Hampshire and said, I want to run in this state. Don't Massachusetts, my New Hampshire. But voters said, wait a second, Scott Brown, this is a red wave year, and Republicans are set to pick up 9 seats in the United States Senate, but not from our state. You don't belong here. And so he lost. This election and the 2014 one arguably was a fumble on the side of the Republicans, and although Scott Brown did lead in the primary and won it fairly, at the end of the day, this race is won by jshooa, despite the national odds being entirely stacked up against the Democratic Party. Because as I mentioned, Democrats went from being in the majority to losing 9 seats from West Virginia, North Carolina, Arkansas, Louisiana, Iowa, South Dakota, Colorado, Montana, Alaska. It was massive. Democrats picked up exactly 0 seats. The same Senate map arises for Democrats in the 2026 cycle. And so does the state of New Hampshire. And now, the former senator, not Chris Sununu, the former senator John Sununu, the brother of Chris Sununu, is now exploring a potential run for Senate. Now, if you remember that 2014 race, as we clicked through it, John Sununu's name might also ring a bell, yes, because his brother was former governor, but also because as we went through it, in 2008, jshooa, the Democratic senator who's retiring this time around, also defeated John Sununu. So 2 Republicans who were defeated by the same Democrat senator, at the time in 2008, wasn't not the Democratic senator, but ran for New Hampshire Senate. One defeated John Sununu in 2014, defeated Scott Brown in 2020, had a landslide victory. Then fast forward to 2026. Now Chris Pappas has the race, and Republicans don't see a pathway forward. Because the Cook Political Report and Larry Sabato's crystal ball and Inside Elections all swear up and down this is a lean Democratic state. I disagree. This is a likely Democratic state until proven otherwise. Because right now, Republicans don't have somebody who can actually win this race. Chris Sununu was that guy, even against jshooa, who won by 16 points because he is a popular governor from the state. He had served in office for a long time, nearly a decade in office, and then decided that he was going to pass on the U.S. Senate. This would have been the biggest get for Republicans across any of the Senate races, which I know sounds interesting because it's in a state they haven't won in a tremendously long time. But I do think that this recent surge for John Sununu to run in New Hampshire is inspired by the fact that Democrats are fielding a lot of their former candidates and some very top names to run in 2026. We saw that Mary Peltola recently has been courted by Chuck Schumer. They're bringing out the big guns on the Democratic side. In Ohio, they got Sherrod Brown to run for Senate yet again. The list goes on and on across these states, but in New Hampshire, Republicans haven't had much luck. Because if it is Scott Brown, I can guarantee you this. Scott Brown, who served in the Trump administration and was a senator from a neighboring state, he will lose. Chris Pappas will be elected as U.S. Senator, and it is clear as day as to why that might happen. Even against John Sununu, I'm not confident that it takes a John Sununu to win this Senate race. I'm confident it does take a Chris Sununu to do it, but not John. And there are differences here. Voters aren't all of a sudden going to say, I want it to be, John Sununu because he was senator here before Obama was inaugurated president. Because that's what the case was. Left office in January, around January 3rd-ish, of 2009. Obama had yet to be sworn in. The name brings value. But to the degree that it wins you an election, no. And I don't think that the 2026 national environment is conducive to something to this degree. Right? At least not in my opinion. I think New Hampshire is a state that voted for Vice President Harris by about 3 points, voted for Joe Biden by even more, is not a state that in 2026, a 2018 type of environment where we can actually, see how New Hampshire has voted under a 2018 national environment. In 2018, they didn't have a Senate race. The governor's race went to Chris Sununu, but it was a lot closer than the next year, where Chris Sununu expanded his popularity when he won by 32. In 2018, he won by just 7. And thinking about what the 2018 election did, and thinking about what the 2026 cycle will do, is that 2018 was a very good year for the Democratic Party, and you can find it in the House elections in New Hampshire. It is clear. The races here that in 2016 were close, right? Ann Custer won by about 4.4%. Shea Porter won by about 1.3%. By the next time, it was 9 points for Chris Pappas and 13 points for Custer, right? Where 2 years later, the races actually held on because these incumbents made inroads in 2018. And keep in mind, it was in 2014 that there was most recently a Republican representative from the state of New Hampshire. And that it was 2016, most recently, that there was a Republican senator from the state of New Hampshire. Maggie Hassan won by just 0.14%. This state has been competitive, but to the degree it will be now, I don't know if I see that. And thinking that, John Sununu is going to be this saving grace for the Republican Party, he might offer a last name that provides some comfort to members of the political party. But I don't think it's a winning strategy. And I don't think that John Sununu will defeat Chris Pappas, especially in a year that when 2024 swung in the way it did and Trump won every single battleground state, New Hampshire voted to the left of where it did in 2016. Whereas Wisconsin voted to the right, Michigan voted to the right, Pennsylvania voted to the right, North Carolina to the right, Georgia to the right, Texas to the right, Ohio to the right, Iowa to the right, Florida to the right, Arizona to the right, Nevada to the right, New Hampshire to the left. Thinking about how it stood the test of time, too. Hillary Clinton won that state by a margin of 0.37%. Less than half a point. Donald Trump, in his glory days of 2024. Again, the national shift here, we'll compare the elections. Just take a look. Every single swing state shifted to the right, save Georgia. I forgot, I misspoke earlier when I said Georgia. But the rest of the states, absolutely. Massachusetts swung by 2, New York swung by 10, California by 10, Illinois by 6, Florida by 12. New Hampshire stood out, swung 2.4% to the left. Now thinking about where we are in 2026, you can pretty much expect the same thing, except on a much higher degree and a much higher scale. Democrats are in a good position in New Hampshire because Republicans don't have direction. And Chris Pappas is by no means a bad candidate. Outpaced Hillary Clinton's numbers in 2018 by, 10 points. Went on to win in 2020 by a larger margin than Biden did. Then went on to 2022 to defend a toss-up district and won in said toss-up district not only in 2022 but also in 2024. In 2022, believe it or not as well, defeated none other than Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt in New Hampshire 1st District. She ran as a very young member, hoping to be the youngest elected member of Congress, now was the youngest ever press secretary, but she lost her race in 2022 to Chris Pappas, who again is now likely to be the senator of New Hampshire. And as more and more data pours in, there are less and less reasons to believe the Republicans even stand a chance in this race. And so we will see some updates. If Sununu, not Chris, but John, enters into the race, we'll see. Does this change the dynamic? Does this change the way Republicans and Democrats and independents look at the race? Because my take is probably not. Because at the end of the day, it is the Democrats who have maintained their favorite status in the state, and arguably for good reason. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2025-26 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.